Hello everyone, back tuning into the second summer 2018 Analogues updates from GWV. So, very important update coming up for you right now. We've got a really big Analogues update indeed, because we're going to be looking at summers that occur either 1 or 2 years before solar minima, which is roughly where we are in the current solar cycle number 24. So it's a critical update this when we come to issue the GWV.com summer 2018 forecast at the end of May. This will play a pretty big part in that summer forecast. And I'm going to talk you through all of the analogues that our good friend, our analogues guru, James Ackrill, has got together in a moment. We're going to start off beginning with mopping up where we left off with the first analogues update that we did a couple of weeks ago, looking at cold Februaries and the summers that follow them. But just to say that earlier on today, we started the competition a few minutes ago. Actually, we began the competition. So underneath this video here on the home page, you'll just see a green button. Click that. It'll take you through to our competitions page, and you'll be able to see the prize we're giving away. We've teamed up with metcheck.co.uk weather instrumentation. You'll be able to see the prize that we're giving away, how to enter the competition. It's a prize draw, so it's nothing too difficult. You'll be able to see all of the information, and in 1 week's time, each Sunday, we're going to be releasing we're going to be announcing, I should say, the winner of the competition. I should just explain that I'm doing this on Friday night. This is about my 5th or 6th video that I've recorded, so my brain is kind of frazzled. If I make any mistakes or sort of mix up my words a little bit, that is completely the reason why it's been a very, very, very long day of updates for me. So I hope you'll forgive me and bear with me if I make any mistakes. Right, what's I talking about? So the competition will be announcing the winner in 1 week's time on Easter Sunday, but you can see how to enter the competition, what you've got to do to win the prize by going off to the competitions page. You get to that from the green button underneath this video after you've watched our analogues update, of course. So what else I'm going to tell you? It's going to be quite a long video, so you can't watch it all in one go. It will be placed on the summer updates and forecast page later on today for an extensive written report, so you'll be able to read that written report and watch the video whenever you want, if you can't watch it all in one go. And I think that's pretty much everything that I've got to tell you. I have got to say that the GWV Sunday Roundup will be with you sometime around lunchtime or early afternoon, and then we've got another Easter update to do sometime this season. So it's going to be an epic day of updates at GWV's. Right, that's everything I'm going to tell you. Let's get on with the second analogues update. We're going to begin, as I say, by just having a very quick recap on where we left off with the first analogues update that we did a couple of weeks ago, when we was looking at cold Februaries and the summers that follow them. So James Ackrill, our analogues guru, has got this table together. And by the way, a big, big thank you to James, as always, because I couldn't do these long-range updates, including the analogues, without James's research. I haven't got the time to go off and get all of these charts reanalysed myself. So James does the work behind the scenes. And I say big, big thank you, as ever, to James Ackrill for his input with these long-range forecasts that we're doing now at GWV. I think we're really pushing the envelope, pushing the boundaries, and it's just fantastic, really, what we're doing now with the summer updates and the seasonal updates, and I couldn't do any of it, really, without James's input. So, as always, big thank you to James Ackrill. So, this table is depicting cold Februaries and the summer CTs, by month, that follow those cold Februaries, set against the 81 to 2010 average. So we start off by explaining the cold Februaries. We're looking at a range of CETs between 2.5 and 3.3 degrees, which is roughly in the area where February 2018 was, of course, coming out with CET at 2.9. So these are our years in this first column. We've got 1900 where we start, down to 2013. when we end. This column is showing the February CETs of those years. For example, 1900 had a February CET of 2.6. 1932 came out with a February CET of 2.9, exactly where we was for the February CET this year. We come down to 1978, that has a February CET of 2.8. Come further down still, so we've got 1996 here at 2.5 and 2010 at 2.8. So they're the years and the cold Februaries that we looked at in the first Analogues update. These are the monthly CTs for the summer. So we've got June just here, July just here, and August just here. The colours are depicting whether these months are above or below the 81 to 2010 average. So, for example, in 1940, we had a June CT following that cold February of 2.6 degrees, had a June CT of 16.4. It's coloured red because it's a substantially warmer than average month. But look what happens in July and in August. Both of those months are coming out at 15.1 and 15.6, and they are blue in those columns. So this is just kind of like presenting the picture that we talked about in the first Analogues update. And it's really telling us what we already know, in that June, out of the 3 summer months, when we follow column average February's, June is more likely, has a greater chance, if you will, to be above average. Because whilst we have got some very cold Junes here, for example, 1907 and 1909 coming out with June CETs of 12.4 and 11.8. Overall, the June column has more sort of pink or red compared to any of the other columns. So we've got June 1900, June 1930, 1926, 1940, 1947, 1970, and then coming down to, that should be 1984, that column just there, then 1994, 1996, and 2010, all average to above average with the Junes. But you see, it's a very different story when we look in the July column, because then we only have 1900, 1984, 1994, 2010, and 2013, but that are going into the red colours, whereas all of these other Julys are coloured blue. So these are all colder than average. 1906, 1907, 1909, 1924, 1930, 1932, 1936, 1940, 1954, and so on down the column. Now, the only thing I would say is that the more recent years here, so let's start at 1984, the more recent years, these ones just here, many of those are coming out with average to warmer than average Julys. So these colder Julys are further back. It is possible that they aren't quite as relevant to kind of like the modern era. That's a little bit of a controversial point, but it is something to keep at the back of your mind. It's a very similar story when we look at August as well. So for August, following these cold Februaries, we do have 1 or 2 Augusts coming out quite warm. We've got 1932 at 17.1 and 1984 at 17.6 and 2013 at 16.9. Also possibly 1996 at 16.5. But other than that, generally many of these Augusts are coming out quite cold, especially the ones that occur further back as well. So it just kind of like tells us what we knew when we did the first Analogues update, that out of all of the summer months, when we follow a cold February, June is possibly the one that has the greatest chance, it's not guaranteed, but possibly the greatest chance of being warmer. And then July and August looks like generally many of those are quite cool, except for the caveat that the later years, which possibly is more relevant to this year, 2018, the later years do show some warming going on. If we combine January to those cold Februaries, so if we combine, if you like, mild Januaries to cold Februaries, it's very similar story. So again, this is our years, not as many of them, combining mild Januaries and cold Februaries, and these are the summer monthly CTs, June, July and August. We see that so June does have that one quite warm month standing out just there, 1913. Also has quite a cold month at 1981. Remember, this compared to 81 to 2010 averages. The other three are close to average. For July, where we've got 4 of the months that are coming out colder than average, but one very warm month in 1994. And then August just generally looks quite disappointing, really. So we've got 2 that are significantly colder than average, and the rest are just a little bit cooler than the 81 to 2010 average. You certainly wouldn't look at this data for summers that follow cold Februaries and think that it's a strong signal for a warmer than average summer. Although, as I say, June could be the month has the greatest chance of being above average. Right, so that's cleared everything up for the where we left off with the last Analogues update. Now let's have a look at the solar cycles. So this is the solar disk on our side of the disk today when I'm recording the video on the 21st of March. It's a spotless solar disk at solarhound.net, and the reason it's spotless is because we are heading very quickly and inexorably towards solar minimum. So we're either going to be 1 or 2 years, 2 summers I should say, away from solar minimum. So we're going to start off by looking at all of the summers that were 2 years from solar minimum, going right the way back to 1865. And I'm not sure what solar cycle that is. I've got a feeling it's solar cycle back in the teens, but it's a very long time ago. And this is how the summer of 1865, which was 2 years before the solar minimum of that solar cycle. This is how it looks, with a deep trough of below average heights centered to the east and the north, and a ridge of above average heights out to the west. And so we do something like that with the flow and with the jet stream. It looks a pretty cool and pretty unsettled summer to start us off. This is the summer of 1877. So this is going to be just before the solar minimum of solar cycle, let me get this right, that will be just for the solar minimum of solar cycle number 11. So actually that last year, solar cycle 1865, that last summer, that would be just for the solar minimum of solar cycle 10. Remember, we're looking at summers that are 2 years from solar minimum to start off with. So this is how the summer of 1877 looks, two summers before the solar minimum of solar cycle number 11, and it looks very unsettled with a deep area of below average heights over the UK. We've got quite a strong blocking signal as well. That looks like a very, very poor summer indeed, bringing the flow and the jet stream through like that. This is 1888, 2 summers before the solar minimum of solar cycle number 12, and this one looks like a very poor summer as well, with a strong blocking signal to the north, below average heights underneath it, and pulling the wind in from the east like that. Let's go on to 1900. So this is this showed up in our cold February analogues, of course, this summer. So this one looks like we have the below average heights through the Atlantic and going into Europe as well. We've got a bit of a blocking signal to the north, but also over Scandinavia. So it looks like quite a cool and unsettled summer. The only thing you'd say about it is that possibly we do bring the air in from the southeast at times. So some warmer intervals may be showing up, but overall looks very unsettled. This is one of the worst summers of the 20th century, 1912. Rather alarming to see this one showing up. So there's not much you can say about the summer of 1912, other than it does occur sort of 2 summers before the solar minimum of its solar cycle. But the only other thing you can say is that it is one of the worst summers of the 20th century. It has that deep area of blocking to the north, and then this strong sort of trough to the south. The jet stream is on a southerly track. Basically, everything that can go wrong does go wrong in the summer of 1912. It's an atrocious summer, and it is quite alarming to see that showing up within our Analogues package. This is 1922, and this is another very poor summer as well, I'm afraid. So again, this summer occurs 2 years before the solar minimum of its solar cycle, and again, this is another one of the worst summers of the 20th century. So quite alarming to see those 2 years, 1912 and 1922, showing up in our Analogues package. The only saving grace is that they're a very long time ago, but you certainly don't want to repeat of either of those summers, 1912 or 1922. This is 1932, so again, this is 2 years before the solar minimum of its solar cycle, and we have the above average heights out in the Atlantic and going up to the north, with below average heights to the south. It's a rather cool and block type setup, but it's not as bad as those other 2 summers. We will be bringing in the air from rather a cool direction. We're blocking off the Atlantic, so I don't think it's an overly wet summer. It's certainly not a particularly warm summer, but it isn't as atrocious as 1912 or indeed 1922. This is 1942. Notice we've got a lot of number 2s showing up here with these analogues. I'm not sure how that works out. It's just a quirk, I suppose, that you can get with these solar cycles at times. So this is how the summer of 1942 looks. Again, blocking off the Atlantic, below average heights to our northeast, doing something like that with the flow and with the jet stream. I assume that's a rather mediocre summer, nothing overly dramatic. It's not as bad as the summers of 1912 and 1922. It's nothing to get excited about, just a rather benign, I would assume fairly quiet and coolish summer in 1942. We've got 1952 next. So again, this is 2 years before the solar minimum of the solar cycle of 1952, and we've got above average heights again in the Atlantic, so that's a bit of a theme, a bit of a mid-Atlantic ridge, with below average heights to the east-northeast, and rather a cool summer again in 1952. That, of course, contained the Boscastle event, the severe flooding that occurred down in the southwestern part of the country. I think I've got the name of that wrong, actually. Boscastle occurred in 2004. The name of that disaster eludes me at the moment, so I'm sure somebody will tell me what the name of that the Lynmouth disaster, there it came to me. I told you it's been a really long day and my mind is just totally frazzled. I've actually done a 60-minute historic video on the Lynmouth disaster of 1952, so quite why I couldn't bring that to mind, I'm not sure. But there we go, it was the Lynmouth disaster, occurred in the summer of 1952, so hopefully we won't see a repeat of anything like that. Rather a cool and unsettled summer overall in 1952. Right, we finally managed to break away from years with number 2s, and we've gone to 1963. So this is how the summer of 1963 looks, following on from that very severe winter of 62-63. Of course, and it's an unsettled summer overall, with below average heights centred over the UK and much of Western Europe. We've got a bit of a blocking signal as well around Greenland and Iceland, probably left over from the winter pattern. Looks like the jet stream remains rather on a southerly track as well through the summer of 1963. 1974 shows up next. This is a very, very poor summer in the early 1970s. It's a really unsettled summer, and we bring the jet stream and the flow through rather like that. That's the last wet season. Summer of 1974 was the last wetter than average season, I believe, until the autumn of 1976. So from autumn 74 through to summer 76, that's the drought period, of course, of the mid-70s. So this is the last wet season for a couple of years, going through to 1976. 1985 is coming up next. This is a very, very poor summer in the mid-1980s, deep area below average heights, and the jet stream on a southerly track. That was a cool and wet summer in 1985. But then we've got 1995. This is our first summer that is good. So this is occurring 2 years before solar minimum. And look at this, we've got this strong blocking signal showing up. So, as I say, that's our first summer that is a really good summer. That was hot, dry, it's a drought summer in 1995. I'm sure a lot of you have really fond memories of the never-ending sunshine and heat and drought. Well, maybe not fond memories of drought, but certainly you'll have fond memories, I would assume, a lot of you, of the summer of 1995. And then finally, for this Analogues package, we've got 2007. And again, what to say about this? Well, again, it's one of the worst summers. Well, not worst summer of the 20th century, but probably one of the worst summers, or will be one of the worst summers of the 21st century. Strong blocking signal around Greenland and extending to the north, with that almost near stationary trough of below average heights just sitting there over the UK and Western Europe. Jet stream on a southerly track, so not only is it phenomenally wet through May, June and July of 2007, it's also a pretty cool summer as well. So if we combine all of those years, this is what we come out with for the Junes of those years. So for June, it looks like we get sun ridging to our north and to our northeast with these summers that are 2 years before solar minimum, with below average heights to the south, and it means that we do something like that, the flow and with the jet stream. So they are fairly cool and unsettled Junes for these summers. But not as bad as July, because this is how the Julys of these summers are shaping up. It is kind of similar, really, to the cold February analogues in a lot of respects, because the Julys just look absolutely atrocious when you combine them all together. You come out with this strong blocking signal, but you also come out with this really deep trough of below average height centred over the UK and much of northwestern Europe as well. And again, we're on the cold side of the jet stream. And then for August with these summers, it's almost as bad. So again, we have the strong blocking signal with these Augusts that are 2 years before solar minimum, with a deep area of low pressure below average heights underneath it. And if you know how to read these reanalysis charts, you'll know that that is an atrocious signal for both July and for August with these summers that are 2 years before solar minimum. June, not quite as bad, nothing to be excited about, but not quite as bad in June. And if we put all of those months together and come out with combined overall summer charts, that's how it looks. And it does look very, very bad indeed, with again a strong blocking signal to the north, but below average heights underneath it. And again, we're doing something like that with the flow and with the jet stream. So these summers that are 2 years before solar minimum, despite the fact we've got 1995, which was a hot and dry summer in our analogues package, overall, it does look a very, very ominous signal. And I think this is where we are in the solar cycle. So not good signals from a solar perspective. This is how the summers that are 1 year before solar minimum looks, or within 1 year. So if you like, these are the true solar minimum summers of their solar cycles. We're starting at 8 with 1866, which looks very unsettled, below average heights over the UK and to the north, with a bit of a ridge around Iceland, and we're on the cold side of the jet stream. The solar minimum summer of 1878 looks very unsettled as well, with below average heights around the UK and into Scandinavia, and the blocking signal out to the northwest. The jet stream would be on a southerly track. The solar minimum summer of 1889 has below average heights to the south and a bit of a blocking signal up to the north. That looks like really quite a poor summer as well in 1889. Then we've got the solar minimum summer of 1901. This looks a lot better. This one has an area of high pressure centering over Scandinavia and probably quite a lot of easterly winds. So that looks like it would be a pretty warm and dry summer in 1901. 1913 is our next solar minimum summer, with above average heights out to the north and the northwest, and below average heights to the southeast, and so we pull the winds in from the east and the northeast rather like that. 1923 comes up next. This is a very poor summer indeed, with below average heights to the east and above average heights to the west. I think it's a rather unusual summer pattern, this one, in that it's very dry. It's quite a dry summer, despite the fact we've got that trough over Scandinavia, but it is quite a dry summer, but also it's quite a coolish summer as well for the solar minimum summer of 1923. 1933 shows up next. This is a better summer, with an area of above average heights to the northeast and also to the west, with below average heights to the southeast. I think we get a reasonable summer there in 1933. That was one of the better summers of the first half of the 20th century. 1943 next, which looks like a rather bizarre pattern, with above average heights to the south, low pressure coming through the middle, and then quite a strong northern blocking signal. I'm not sure quite what's going on with that summer, but I don't think it was particularly notable either way for the summer of 1943. 1953 shows up next. This is another very poor summer, really, with below average heights over and to the west of the UK. The jet stream is coming through rather like that. Notice a lot of these summers are placing above average heights close to Scandinavia, so a lot of these summers have a bit of a blocking signal for Scandinavia, but for us it just looks really quite unsettled and fairly cool. This is 1964. Now this is a very odd looking reanalysis. I'll have to speak to James about what this summer was like, because it has a really massive area of below average heights to our north, and then also very bizarrely it has below average heights going on to the south, so through parts of North Africa, for example, and even into the Mediterranean. The summer of 1964, I don't think it's particularly notable either way for the UK. I think it's just another one of those 1960s summers that was rather cool, rather unsettled. It wasn't one of the worst summers of the 1960s, of course, but the 1960s is an infamous decade for summers, in that there were some really, really bad summers through 1964. Wasn't one of those very worst summers, but it wasn't a particularly good summer either in 1964. Got 1975, a solar minimum summer of 1975 is the first of two very hot summers through the 1980s, with again a strong area of above average heights over the UK and a lot of easterly winds. Bear in mind it does have the snow at the beginning of June 1975, but once that got out of the way, the rest of the summer was generally hot and dry, with the two hot and dry summers back to back of 75 and 1976. Then we swing the other way to the summer of 1986. So this is the solar minimum summer of 1986, and it's a really bad summer with a deep area of below average heights over the UK and extending to Europe as well. Lots of low pressure in the Atlantic as well, really buoyant northern Atlantic. The only reason that area below average heights over the UK isn't as intense as you might expect is that June 1986 1986 was generally fairly dryish and anticyclonic, but by August, my word, did we open the floodgates to the Atlantic Ocean. Then we've got 1996 yet, next, the solar minimum summer of 1996 looks like that, with below average heights to the south, a bit of a reach to the southwest, and then lots of below average heights up to the north as well. It's a rather odd summer in 1996, neither one thing nor another. It wasn't particularly bad, but it wasn't all that good either. But I think all of the summer months did have at least one or two hotter spells and thundery breakdowns as well. It's a classic thundery breakdown in the early part of June 1996. And then finally we come to the solar minimum summer of 2008, and this is how it looks. Very unsettled summer with below average heights over the UK, a blocking signal up to the north, and again we bring the jet stream and the flow through like that. There was a decent May in 2008, but once that was out of the way, it was a very poor summer indeed. So if we combine all of those years again, this is how the Junes of these solar minimum summers look, and not too bad actually. Area of above average heights very close to the country, with below average heights out to the northwest and down to the south. So again, the suggestion there that maybe June not too bad. What does July have in store for us? Well, not as good as June. Not as bad, however, interestingly, as the summers that are 2 years before solar minimum summers we're just looking at. So not as bad as those summers, but nevertheless, when we combine the Julys, this is what we come out with: below average heights to our east, above average heights to the west, and so we pull down the winds from a northwesterly direction. Rather cool, rather unsettled Julys. Then the August do look very, very bad. So again, it's this idea, and it's there for the summers that are 2 years before solar minimum, but it's even more obvious for the years that are 1 year before solar minimum that we're kind of front loading the summers, with June tending to have the best of the summer weather. July has a deterioration, and then we get to August, it looks really, really bad in August with a strong blocking signal. And look at this below average heights over UK and going into the Atlantic as well. Just very, very cool and wet August being favoured here with these analogues that are 1 year or their solar minimum August. If we bring all of those summer months together, this is how the summers look with all years combined, and it's a very, very unsettled signal overall again, with below average heights over the UK and Western Europe, above average heights out to the north and to the northwest too. I do think that it's the first batch of analogues we looked at though that are most relevant for this summer, because I think next summer 2019 will actually be the solar minimum summer of this solar cycle, if you like. You never know for definite until you've passed solar minimum when it's going to occur, but I think we've got one more summer to go that will be the true solar minimum summer of this solar cycle. So I think it's the first batch of analogues that are most relevant, and I think it'll be those analogues that we put into the summer forecast when we come to issue it at the end of May. And finally, just isolating some of those years out a little bit to weaker solar cycles. So these are how the Junes look for the weakest end of those solar cycles. Because, of course, there are many solar cycles that we've covered there with those analogues, and they are varying in strength. So what James has done finally is just to isolate out the very weakest of the solar cycles, the strongest or longest lasting, I suppose I should say, solar minimums. And this is what we look at for June, with quite a strong blocking signal up to the northeast, and then we've got that below average area of heights out to the southwest. So again, it does suggest the possibility, perhaps no more than that, but the possibility of something quite decent and reasonable happening in June. But then look at this, we get to July and it's that same old story again. in July, with that strong blocking signal setting up around Greenland and Iceland, but below average heights to the south of it around the UK and France. Therefore, we're going to be pulling down cold air from the north and from the northeast, and so July just looks really quite poor indeed, and it continues through to August as well. July and August both causing concern here with these analogues, as we see again for these weakest of the solar cycles and most protracted solar minimums. It does look as though the Julys and the Augusts are very unsettled, with the possibility of something a little bit better starting off the summer in June, but not sustained through the rest of the summer. And all of those summers combined looks like this. So again, it is a strong signal for above average heights to the north and below average heights to the south, and therefore cool and unsettled is the favoured outcome from those weakest, most protracted solar minimums and weakest solar cycles. Unsettled and cool is the most likely outcome. So not a very good analogues update if you want a hot and dry summer. Our analogues are very much favouring the chance of a cool and unsettled summer from a solar perspective. And when we add this to the first batch of analogues that we did for summers that follow cold Februaries, then we're already beginning to build up a little bit of a picture perhaps for this summer to not be great. June potentially holding the the best prospect, if you like, of being a reasonable summer month, but then deterioration through July and August. However, we've got many more analogues to look at before we get to the summer forecast, so this is by no means the final word on it. This is an important element of the summer forecast, and it will make up definitely part of the summer 2018 forecast when we come to issue forecast at the end of May. But we've got more things to look at. We've got the QBO to have a good look at in the next few weeks. We'll be looking at ENSO as well, ENSO condition, be it La Nina or maybe going to El Nino even through the summer. So there's going to be a lot more to keep an eye on. We're actually going to have some more analogues next Sunday for Easter. I don't want to say anything about that yet because it's going to be something completely new and original, something that we've never looked at before and probably will never look at again, to be honest, or maybe not for a really long time. But I'll have more for that next Sunday on Easter Sunday, and that's going to be a really interesting analogues update. I think it'll take a lot of people by surprise. So come back for that next week. This video is going to be placed in the summer updates and forecast page later on today with an extensive written report. The upshot is basically that the solar analogues are favouring a cool and unsettled summer. We shall see. Right, in a couple of hours' time, we're going to have the GWV Sunday Roundup. That'll be with you over lunch. And then we've got the 4th, I think it's the 4th, Easter update to do this evening. And also don't forget to have a look at the competition, see what we're giving away and how you can win that prize in association with metcheck.co.uk weather instrumentation. But that's all for now, and thanks for watching.